Nintendo is a company that likes to follow its own trends, and as a result they can be a bit predictable. For instance, looking back through the years, Nintendo has always released at least 2 Zelda games on every single home console in one way or another. Well, all but one, that is. The Super Nintendo only has one Zelda game to its name, with that of course being The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. But what if I told you there actually is another Zelda game that released exclusively in Japan and was a direct sequel to A Link to the Past, and you've probably never heard of it? Today, that changes. Say hello to The Legend of Zelda: Ancient Stone Tablets. Let's go back to the 16-bit era. The Super Nintendo was in its prime, and Nintendo was looking for ways to expand its capabilities. That's when Nintendo decided to buy a 19.5% controlling stake in a company called St. Giga. Now at the time, St. Giga was a satellite radio company, known primarily for being the world's first digital audio broadcasting corporation. However, due to financial troubles, they partnered with Nintendo in 1995 and created the Satellaview system, a Japanese exclusive add-on to the Super Famicom, or the Japanese version of the Super Nintendo. With this device, St. Giga was able to expand their services from not only music, but to data such as news, magazines, full games and demos, as well as special timed broadcasts they called Soundlink broadcasts, which would take full advantage of both the gaming capabilities of the Super Famicom and St. Giga's digital audio broadcasting technology. However, all of this extra tech was expensive. Not only would you need a Super Famicom, you would also need the Satellaview add-on, a St. Giga BS tuner, a satellite dish, and if you wanted to download larger games, you would need a memory pack that would allow you to store up to 8 megabits of data. And that was just the hardware. On top of everything else that I just listed, you would also have to pay a monthly subscription fee to St. Giga to even use the satellite service. It's hard to pinpoint just how much this would have cost the average consumer, but the Satellaview add-on itself cost around 18,000 yen, which is roughly $200 US, and that's without the St. Giga BS tuner, which you could rent or purchase directly from St. Giga. Now, believe it or not, Nintendo actually released a number of games via the Satellaview. Super Mario Bros., F-Zero, SimCity, Chrono Trigger, and yes, of course, The Legend of Zelda were all franchises that got broadcast at one point or another. And I say broadcast because each day St. Giga had a specific broadcasting schedule. For instance, early in the morning you might have access to some magazines, later in the afternoon you might have Soundlink games, and during the evening they would broadcast regular games to download. Some of these games were remastered versions of older games, like for instance BS: The Legend of Zelda. The BS stands for Broadcast System, by the way, as not to be confused with anything else. This remastered version updated the 8-bit graphics to better suit the 16-bit monster that was the Super Nintendo. And because this was also a Soundlink game, it featured voice acting and orchestral music, making this a truly unique way to experience the original Legend of Zelda. They even went as far as to release new maps, which would keep the story the same, but change the general layout of Hyrule slightly. So I guess you could say this was a very early version of Master Quest in a way. Because the Satellaview featured its own characters to navigate its RPG town-like menu system, instead of playing as Link, you would play as your Satellaview avatar. However, this doesn't make it any less of a Nintendo-made Zelda title. This is not the same thing as the CDI. Nintendo didn't give the rights away to St. Giga to develop these games, and as far as I could tell, they were developed directly by Nintendo, giving them a sort of credibility in my opinion. Ancient Stone Tablets takes place exactly 6 years after the events of A Link to the Past. Hyrule is at peace, but Princess Zelda is suffering from a reoccurring dream which features a dark shadow looming over one of the temples. One day, a bright light bursts through the sky to the east, and both Zelda and Agena, the younger brother of Sahasrahla from A Link to the Past, witness the phenomena. Agena travels to inspect the light at its source, with Zelda not too far behind. They arrive to find a boy or a girl at the suspected spot where the light met the earth. This character is of course your Satellaview avatar. Zelda and Agena bring you back to Agena's shrine near the Eastern Palace, and there we find out that Sahasrahla, sensing a looming evil power, has left in search of the hero Link, but has yet to return. Zelda, on the other hand, senses astounding courage from you, the player, and believes you to be the fabled Hero of Light. Agena remains with you, the player, until you awaken, and informs you of everything that has transpired. Believing that you are indeed the Hero of Light, he gives you a few items and tells you of a sword and shield that you can obtain in the Eastern Palace. As Zelda makes her way back to Hyrule Castle, a guard from the Eastern Palace returns to Egina and informs him of a brutal monster horde that attacked the temple. As the only survivor, he barely escaped to relay this important information. After acquiring the sword and shield from the Eastern Palace, it's time to start collecting the ancient stone tablets. The first 2 tablets are obtained after defeating the Armos Knights in Moldorm in the first 2 temples. Directly after, you must rescue Princess Zelda from a band of monsters and escort her safely back to Hyrule Castle. Here again you meet up with Egina and he offers some advice on translating the tablets. His efforts are ultimately unfruitful, so instead he sends you off in search of more tablets. Once you retrieve 2 more of the stone tablets, Zelda suggests using the Book of Medora to translate the ancient text. Egina sets off in search of the book, while you, the hero, set out to discover the remaining tablets. Eventually, Egina finds the Book of Medora, and you and Zelda meet with him at the castle. The translated text of the tablets tells of the legendary silver arrows, and how they are buried on a mountaintop. The group then travel to the sanctuary at the foot of Death Mountain, where Zelda explains that she's had another vision. This time, it was of her holding the Book of Medora at the peak of Death Mountain. Naturally, you and Zelda head up to the summit. Along the way, you pick up the final 2 stone tablets. While all of this is happening, the fortune teller sees the King of Evil in a vision. Despite having his body destroyed, Ganon has been able to keep his spirit alive, and it was for this exact reason that the Hero of Light was brought into Hyrule. Once the hero reaches the summit of Death Mountain, he is teleported to another world to challenge the Demon King in an all-new version of Ganon's Tower. Ganon is after the full power of the Hero of Light, but is ultimately defeated by you, the hero, using the silver arrows once again. As you can imagine, the Legend of Zelda Ancient Stone Tablets plays very similarly to A Link to the Past, but because Ancient Stone Tablets was a Sound Link game, it could only be played for a limited amount of time during its broadcasting slot. For this reason, the game was split up into 4 parts, featuring their own distinct part of the story. For exactly 1 hour each week, the players would be tasked with completing dungeons, finding secrets, and collecting rupees, which served as a sort of scoring system for the game. After the allotted time was up, the game would end, regardless of if the players managed to complete everything. To account for this, the game saves the player's progress at the end of each play session, keeping track of stone tablets collected, items, and other progress made. Upon next week's broadcast, the game would allow you to continue from where you left off, or even attempt to complete things from the previous week's broadcast. The only caveat to this was the game's dungeons. Failing to complete a dungeon during that week's broadcast would lock the player out of completing it in any future cast. Instead, a thief would stand outside the incomplete dungeon and hand the player a large bag of spoils containing any items found inside that were needed to complete the game. Because the Satellaview system was already able to stream music over the airwaves, Nintendo leveraged this in their SoundLink broadcast to allow games to be played with CD-quality orchestral music and live voice, a technology that would give tips to the player during important moments. Characters like Zelda and Egina would speak directly to the player and give important story details, which in a way makes this the first Zelda game to feature voice acting. This would not have been possible without the extra Satellaview hardware. And those weren't the only timed events. Things like weather, power-ups such as infinite ammo and max hearts, attack spells, and even sword beams could happen at any given point. The player could also have the chance to advance the story by saving Princess Zelda from a monster attack, or rescue a sage from drowning in a lake. You could even get randomly attacked by Zora or led to a secret stash of rupees by a friendly mole character. These events certainly added a lot more depth to Ancient Stone Tablets and made each play session a unique experience. Outside of its original 4-week broadcast, The Legend of Zelda Ancient Stone Tablets was only ever broadcast in full 1 other time, meaning that there were only 2 chances for anyone who owned a Satellaview to play through the game in its entirety. After those broadcasts were finished, it was impossible to play the game, even if the data was saved onto a BSX cart. But that's not how this story ends. Thanks to a group of dedicated fans and over a decade's worth of work, today, we have a version of The Legend of Zelda Ancient Stone Tablets that is as close to the original as we can possibly get. By extracting the ROM information from old BSX carts that still had each week's data on them, the guys over at ZeldaLegends.net have been able to carefully recreate the games by not only using data from those recovered BSX carts, but also by looking at older video recordings from way back when the game was originally broadcast. The game's script was even found inside those BSX carts, so despite the original voice acting only being available during the broadcast, thanks to the power of modern emulation, we can enjoy a fully translated English dub. And that's not all. Even the orchestral music that originally played during the broadcast can be enjoyed, thanks to the release of the soundtrack on a CD titled The Legend of Zelda: Sound and Drama. Meaning that after all this time, anyone can now enjoy The Legend of Zelda Ancient Stone Tablets in a way that is as close to the original as we can possibly get. Now that's all for this video. I'll leave links in the description to ZeldaLegends.net so you can check out all the work they've done on the BS-Zelda games. And if you enjoyed this video, a like rating would be greatly appreciated. If you'd like to see more of my videos, consider subscribing. But once again guys, I've been Matt, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.